contribute? Hearing nothing, I assume there is no public input. Next item would be the approval of the April 5th minutes. Everybody have a chance to review the minutes?
Yeah.
Any questions or concerns? I know you just emailed something over, Steve. Did you want to input that?
Well, no, that came after the meeting. That was an email from Brian to us with a question from another group. So I'm not sure where that fits in, actually, Tom.
That'll be additional items on our agenda. So.
Okay.
So any other questions or input on the minutes from the last meeting, folks?
I think they're clear and concise as always.
Okay. I'll entertain the
I'll
motion
move to accept. Yeah. I'll move.
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes are approved unanimously. Next up is the Fall 2021 Special Grant Hearing or Hearings. Story Theater Company with the Frozen application is really the only one we have at the moment.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to start, I suppose?
Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Sue Ann Peters. I'm with Story Theater Company. We wrote the fall special grant because, with COVID, we had bought rights to perform Frozen in June of 2020. And so that is in the fiscal year 2021. And we were unable to do that in June. And we have delayed it to the fall of 21, which puts it into the next fiscal year. So our next fiscal year, we had already submitted our annual grant application, and the plan was to do a play in the fall. And we have a little different budgeting items, whether we do a play or whether we do a musical. And so there was just some additional costs that we had with performing a musical, and specifically the costs that we have that are additional have to do with our artistic honoraria, but also our production costs. So we are going to cover our production costs increase. Our additional honoraria is we pay a director $100 more. We also hire a musical director and a choreographer, and that's something unique to a musical over a play. So that's kind of where we were at and why we asked for the special grant to help fund that additional honoraria costs.
Okay.
I can answer any questions that you may have. I don't know what all you want to know or are interested in hearing about the proposal that we had submitted.
Your application was fairly clear. You work a lot with the Boys and Girls Clubs too, don't you?
We do. We're actually kind of doing something unique when we talked about reopening with Story Theater Company when we were talking in January, February this year and trying to get going, is we're doing kind of a suggested donation ticketing prices. So we're allowing anybody to come tickets. It's a little bit harder to budget for a show because somebody could, reserve a ticket for $0 or somebody could donate. We're suggesting $10 donation per ticket. We started it with our online teen show that we did this winter. And then we're doing it here in June for Young Sherlock. We're doing it that way as well, where you reserve your seat and then you can donate for your ticket. And we're doing the same for Frozen in the fall. We're really wanting arts to be accessible in our community. And we realized that some people did quite well and fared fine during COVID with their jobs, and some people didn't. And so we really have a heart to help in that way and make it that youth can still come to our shows, that families can still afford to come to our shows, and plan to promote it and help. Yeah, Boys and Girls Club is one of our main ones that we work with. We also go to Food at First and Youth and Shelter Services, and we plan to work with guidance counselors in the schools too. There's some privacy things there that you have to be, that are tricky. So we think we're going to go through the schools in that way to offer tickets, as they kind of have identified people who would benefit greatly from being able to go, or would know you can't really just ask people their financial situation, and or they wouldn't tell us, like, oh, write these following families or whatever. So
anyone have any questions?
I had a question just about that new approach, and I think it's wonderful, and I was just curious how you're estimating the ticket revenue in your budget. I saw you put $10,000, but I was curious just how you came up with that number as far as what you're expecting to receive from these donations.
Yeah, so we typically would have budgeted maybe like $12,000 to $14,000 in ticket sales. So that's where, it's an estimation. It's the best we can do, like with what we saw based on the online show, but online is so different than an in-person show. So to be honest, we had to kind of just do our best at estimating and just say, okay, we have grant money that we've received. It's hard because some of the grant money from this fiscal year will help us really more for next fiscal year. Because as we're reopening these shows, if we don't have the attendance we thought, that's how that's going to help. Does that make sense? Some of the emergency grant money, not CODA money, but the emergency grants and things that were offered through the state and through Iowa Cultural Affairs. And so, sorry, that's not a very precise thing. We're just doing our best to try to estimate the crowds, the shows, what our capacity would be. We're hoping with Frozen that it's not any capacity limits in the auditorium. For Young Sherlock, there's a capacity limit of how many people we can put in with social distancing. So let's hope for the fall it's not that, right? So.
Tom, I had a quick question, clarification. The honoraria for, or the additional honoraria for the director for a musical, that's presumably because it's tougher to put together a musical, right?
Yes.
Okay.
When we set up our honoraria, the way that we pay for plays, with a play, you pretty much have a director and a stage manager and then other staff. But when you're doing a musical, you have a director, a musical director, a stage manager, a choreographer. There's a little more on that director. So we pay a little more on the musicals. It's a little bit more staff even that they're working with, to coordinate through to do a musical.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
So just for our new commissioners, just to outline the process. So you'll take this information, and there's no decision tonight. You'll decide at the June CODA meeting whether you'd like to make an award and how much. And then depending on the amount, we'll put it in a contract and send it off to the agency. Now, what you'll all need to do is figure out your proposed amount, and then we will put all 5 of those individual amounts together that you've got, one for each commissioner, and figure out what's the average. And then do you like that average, or do you want to tinker with it? And you can do that at the June meeting. Since there's only one request, I'm probably not going to send out a spreadsheet like I normally would. So if you want to just email me individually what your proposed amount is, then I'll consolidate it all together, and then I'll send it all back out to everybody at the same time. So that way you're doing this in the blind, basically. Does that make sense? Any questions about that process?
My only question, I guess, is this is the only special project grant application we're looking at for the fall.
For the fall, yes.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, the next agenda item would be discussion of the city council increase in quota funding for the one-time budget increase for the 2021-2022 budget, the additional $30,640. We kind of pushed that back to discuss at this meeting. Anybody have any thoughts before we, Dan?
Yeah, well, I Zoomed for the council meeting and I think David, Martin was the one who maybe came up with it. And so I just, listening to him, I just assumed it would be a one-off, as they say, and everyone would get what they asked for. And so when I got Steve's information, okay, put it like this. His proposal really grew on me over the weeks. My only concern is I sure hope we get a lot more special grant requests for fall. Because the special grant requests are not supposed to support the annual grant projects, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think the special one we just looked at did. Because there's quota funding in there from the annual grant in the budget. Or is that because it was, rebudgeted from the fall play? I mean, this pandemic makes things very complicated.
Really messes with the fiscal year boundaries too.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I like his proposal after I thought about it for a while. I mean, it makes perfect sense as long as we can, have a lot of special projects for fall.
Well, there's other ways to spend that 9,900 that is shaken loose. I would imagine finding ways to do that works within the constraints of the city budget and so on is another matter.
Brian, what would other possibilities be for that, almost 10,000?
Before we get into that, remind me, Steve, what your proposal was?
Well, if I can remember, Deanne may actually be able to explain it better at this point. But the idea would be to, since it's a 16% increase basically over what we had initially requested, it would be to add 16% to everyone's current allotment, unless that brings it up over what they initially asked for.
Right.
And if it brings it up over what they initially asked for, we would only give them what they originally asked for. So this way, for example, some groups asked for nearly 3 times what they asked for last year. Yeah. And it wasn't clear that that was fully documented. So it would sort of penalize those that were thinking that things would be continuing as usual.
Yes, I agree.
And for a few, we in the original allocation gave nearly what they requested. Mm-hmm. So that they'll be more or less in the same boat as they would have been otherwise. But for others, we did bring down the award amount significantly for reasons that we discussed back then. Mm-hmm. That in the NSF grant game, we have this line that we say, below this line, don't fund even if you have the money, kinds of things.
Yeah.
And none of these proposals were sort of below that line in that same sort of milieu. But there were proposals that were asking for a lot more than we thought they needed.
Or would even spend.
Well, never underestimate the ability of an arts group to spend money.
So with that background, I think I can answer your question, Deanne. So the direction from the council, I have it right here, I'll read it.
Great.
Is it was a motion to increase CODA funding by $30,640. So that would bring it to $223,733 in total for the budget. Subject to receiving a memo from CODA expressing acceptance of the increase or outlining any concerns that they would like council to process. So I would take it that if your proposal was to increase each request by 16%, not to exceed the total amount requested for each agency, then that's sort of along the lines of the second aspect of the council's motion. You're sort of proposing, you're indicating an alternative, right? So we would just simply write a memo to the council saying, this is what you think. And if the council finds that acceptable, they can approve that, and we'll write up the contracts and move on our way. Now, as a reminder, so the whole $223,733 is going to be placed in the budget. So whatever is not allocated to a particular agency is in that set aside for special project grants. And that's the pot of money that you would use for the grant that was requested tonight, and any grants that might come up for spring 2022.
So there's no other venue or no other channel slot category that we can use to make sure that money gets spent by the arts groups in aid?
Well, so CODA basically runs 3 programs, right? You run the annual grant program, the special project fall, and the spring program. And those are really up to CODA. If you have an idea for something that is different than those 3 programs, and you want to propose a new one-time program, let's say, since this is one-time additional money, I think that needs to be kept in mind. You certainly can do that. We can let the city council know that you've got an idea and see if they have any concerns about it, and then create a program. So if you have some other idea, that's certainly fine. And CODA also has control over the criteria of the programs. So I think there was that suggestion that we referenced earlier, Tom. You recall that email from
Karen?
I'm sorry?
From Karen with the CAA?
No. I'm sorry, Steve brought it up earlier.
Oh, from Chris?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes. And so, I think that the questions raised in that email, this is about, expanding the eligibility for CODA funds to be used for paying salaries in the organization. Salaries in particular are hard to do because we're supposed to be buying some service that is for the public. Paying an individual a salary isn't a public benefit in and of itself. But maybe there are other criteria that you could broaden and allow people to use funds for. Or maybe you want to take the $1,000 ceiling on the special project grants for the spring and jack that way up in order to allow people to come up with much bigger projects if they wanted to. If you had a lot more money available to you than you normally would. So you've got a couple of different levers that you can pull, tinkering with the existing programs, making a new program. And a lot of it depends too on how much you decide to set aside for the special project grants or for other activities.
Really wouldn't be enough to have a special program, but raising the limits for the next special projects would be a seems to be a reasonable option to think about.
Yeah. Right, we're talking, just looking at the numbers, with the 16% applied to the previous special projects reserve, that's 6,400 plus the 9,900 that we would realize. So that's $16,000 of very special projects in a very short period of time.
That's
Again,
three times what you normally have.
right. And with not much of that being tapped in for the fall special projects, I think our arts groups can be encouraged to think really big.
Well, I think we're also doing the small arts grant program, and we had 15 applications, I believe it was, for like $44,000 in requests.
Wow.
So now that in theory is for individual artists and not for organizations, which CODA typically deals with. But I think if we open up the doors a little bit, and a lot of these folks could be supported or sponsored by one of the existing organizations, if that was a criteria that we needed to have for CODA, I don't think we would have a problem finding a good use for $15,000, $16,000 come spring. So I guess I tend to like what Steve initially laid out, and having that nice nest egg, this one-time nest egg for the spring, because if we open it up to individual artists like we did for that special grant program, I think we can easily get enough good quality projects and applications that money won't cover everything we have that comes in. So personally, I think that sounds like a pretty good option, but I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks.
I think still relatively new. I agree with you, Tom. If we open that up, spring's going to give people a little more chance to kind of come to terms with what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
I think the lack of fall projects is probably due to a bit of paranoia on can they pull it off. Yeah. So if we go out and say that, hey, the spring projects, like Deanne was saying, maybe raise the limit just a smidge, then that, like you said, would probably prompt people to get more things going. I like that idea of kind of revitalizing with a little bit extra cash in the spring.
Just for reference, until about 3 years ago, the special project grants were limited to $750, and then they were bumped up to $1,000 in an effort specifically to encourage agencies to think about creative new ideas that weren't the activities that they do year after year. So come up with new opportunities that are kind of off the wall. That was the specific purpose of raising that cap.
So I do think Steve's idea makes a lot of sense, but then I think just listening to everybody else, I think my opinion is the minority one here, in that I really do think that the city council chose this increased dollar amount specifically to meet the requested amount of all of the individual agencies and organizations, specifically acknowledging the uncertainty of the time and the recovery that's going to be a long-term process for these organizations, and that it was a gesture of good faith and trust and appreciation for all of these arts organizations in Ames. And so to me, I just want to say yes to that. And thinking about it as this one-time opportunity, I think we can still do all of those things, and think about, these organizations can think about how to recover and come back from this. Even I was thinking about what Sue Ann was saying earlier about the uncertainty of the audience as well, right? And not even being sure of who can afford to attend and what they can afford to pay. And so if we can just, I guess I trust the organizations to have asked for what they need, and we actually have an opportunity to just say yes. That's where I would like to go in regards to the city council's offer.
Well, and I admit that was my first reaction to, but, you know, as far as the more I thought about Steve's, you know, the more I liked it, as long as people weren't getting more than they wanted or asked for rather. But yeah, it's nice to have extra money to talk about.
Well, they're all getting more than they would have gotten if the council had done nothing and
Correct.
just funded at the previous rate. So
Correct.
there is that.
Yeah.
There's several organizations that always ask for more than they expect to get, to be honest. That doesn't mean it's good or bad, but you know, if you tell somebody they can have $100 and they only need 75, they're going to ask for the 100 every time.
Well, they may ask for 125.
Well, Steve would, yes. But I think we did a pretty good job allocating the original funds that we were given by this city. And overall, I kind of like Steve's idea, and because I still think we're more than fairly compensating everybody's grant opportunities. I don't think anybody is going to be suffering because of the additional funds they're going to get this way. And then it leaves us that nice little extra pot of cash, which any of these organizations could come back to for a special grant opportunity in the spring. And by the spring, hopefully there's no masks, people are out and about, we've all got our shots, and it'll be closer to normal finally. And I think all of the organizations will have a better handle on what they can do, how they can do it, what they need, what resources they have, and what they need from us. And I think we'll have a huge swell of people applying for different projects for us. And I know we could use the money in the spring. We could give it all to the annual grants now. But I guess since the city council gave us the latitude or the wiggle room, as you will, to do as we see fit, and they had given us that extra 10,000 because they knew there's an opportunity for individual artists here in the community to grow. I don't think they'd be opposed to us doing that, and I don't think it would have a negative impact on any of the organizations that we are currently funding. That's just my opinion. It doesn't make me right or wrong. Anyone else? We probably need to decide something this meeting so we can get the allocations out to the organizations for the annual grants, because we kind of pushed them back a month already with the extra money opportunity. So I entertain a motion from anyone. Deanne?
I move to accept Steve's proposal to increase the funding at 16% for each proposal, and you know, as long as it doesn't go over the total amount, and then to have additional funding available for the spring special grants project with the caveat that we expand the criteria.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Let me just capture this in the minutes. Sorry, that was a complicated one. And then I have a question. I just want to make sure I understand.
You muted yourself, Brian.
I know, I thought you might not want to hear me type.
Thunder typer. Brian, if it'll help, I can resend the spreadsheet that I put together last month, if you don't have
Okay.
that.
So that was going to be my question. So for example, actors requested 20,000. We recommended 16,890. So 16,890. So they would get 19,592.
576. It's actually 15.9%, not 16.
Ah,
But yeah, that's the spirit of it, though.
okay.
Yeah, I've got the spreadsheet here too, so.
All right, okay. Well, which is it that you want to use? Is it the 16% or the 15.9?
15.9 was the derived from the amount we were given versus what our initial allotment was. So that's a clean definition. 16 gives everybody a penny on every $1,000 or something. Or no, $1 on every 1,000.
Are there any objections to the 15.9 then?
No.
I can argue with Steve's math.
Please do.
Okay, so the way this will work then is I will put this on the city council agenda for next Tuesday. I don't know if it'll be I may put this on the consent agenda where if they like it, then there's no discussion and it's just done. But there's always a chance that the council could pull it and discuss it. In that event, is there anybody who'd be able to come to the meeting at 6 o'clock next Tuesday? Or it starts at 6 o'clock on Tuesday? I mean,
Zoom
certainly I'll be
meeting
there.
or council?
It's on a Zoom meeting,
Okay.
That's the 11th of May.
yes.
Faculty meeting.
I mean, I'm happy to try to explain it the best I can. It's just there may be some questions.
If Steve's available, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll come on, but it's
Okay.
Steve's brainchild.
I have a faculty meeting. I don't know how late it'll go, but I can be on call. Right? I'll have my phone available. When do they decide to pull something from the consent agenda? Would that be at the time, or is it?
It would be very early in the meeting. This meeting is going to be a little unusual because there's a separate meeting that starts at 6, and then the council meeting starts right after that first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you what, I would hate to tie you up for half the evening. I mean, I'm happy to give the council the memo, and if they have any questions, I can do my best to explain it. I would hate to dedicate somebody's whole night to waiting.
Well, if it becomes critical and Tom can't make it, consider me as on call with my beeper.
Okay.
And I can give you my phone number if you want.
Okay. I think I've got it here.
Okay.
And I can be on. It's May 11th at 6.
Yes, it starts at 6.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, in the motion as voted upon, there was loosening or changing the conditions for applications for the project grant. That won't trigger any alarms in the council, right? Because we do have that discretion.
Well, I think, so I think right now, I mean, you haven't actually modified those special project grant criteria yet. You'll need to tell me that later this fall when I come back to you with approval of the special project grant criteria and instructions and so forth, right? The application materials. So we can do that later.
Good.
But we'll tell the council that your intent is to look for ways to put more flexibility into the special project grant process for the spring and do a big push.
Great.
Well said.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan. Are we done with this, Brian?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the Small Arts Grant Program, which we're in partnership with the Public Arts Commission on. Like I said before, we had 15 applications come in, which I was very impressed with because, I mean, it's the first time we've done something like this, and with the pandemic after effects, people are still trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing. And it was about just over $44,000 worth of requested money for the 10,000 that we had. So, but we had some really, really interesting and exciting ideas. So we will not have any trouble at all, I don't think, allocating that 10,000. And Deanne and I and Sarah and Angie from PAC will be getting together later this week on Zoom and just kind of compare notes real quick and then make our recommendations, because there's a couple of the applications were a little gray and I wanted a little more specific information on. And one of the applications was actually submitted by an organization, but the money goes to the individual artists. So I just want to make sure we're not giving the money to the organization, it's going directly to the artists, because that's the way the money was allocated to us. So we want to do it all on the up and up. And the organization's fine with that. They just want to be kept in the loop, obviously. And that's for a mural in Campus Town on a very prominent wall where it'll be nice, I think. So if they're approved, of course. But it just shows that with that kind of turnout and requests on the first time we've ever done it, that hopefully that'll give us some leverage to go back to the city council and let them get this going as a continuing project every year for individual artists like that, depending on the economics here. And that's another reason I'm very confident we can find a home for that 15, 16,000 of special grant money this spring too. So
That is such excellent news. I'm really delighted.
any other questions on that? We'll move on, and the arts capital grant allocation update on that $200,000 from the city. Do we have any more information on that, Brian? Or?
No, I think things are coming along really well with the small arts grants. And so as soon as those are done and we get that off the plate, then I think we'll be ready to start working on the criteria for the capital funding and figuring out how that works. So I would expect sometime next month, I think would be the earliest that we would get that going.
The next item is upcoming important dates, but should we slide in here the conversation on what Chris had emailed us on about being able to use their annual grant for salaries?
It's up to you what you want to do with that. I think there are some challenges with that specific proposal. I mean, I'm sure it would provide a lot more flexibility for agencies, but when we're proving out what we're spending tax money on for outside agencies, we can't give gifts, right? We have to be buying a service and getting something in exchange. So all of our contracts, the way they're set up, they are contracts for art services. So we are buying subsidized admissions and buying performances for the public and things like that. So it would be difficult for us to justify taking money, city funds, and putting that directly towards salaries. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use city money to pay. You can't pay somebody as a part of putting on a performance or something like that. It's just got to be bundled together as part of the overall cost to put on the performance or the act or whatever it might be. There's a cost for providing the service to the public. We just don't itemize all that out. So
well, as we saw the way Story Theater Company did it, that's without that the thing doesn't happen. It's not a staff member; it's the expertise you need in order to do it. And that's a very clean way to do that.
What organization asked for the permission to use the money for salary?
This was a request that came after last month's meeting when when there was a discussion about what to do with the additional funding that the council had allocated, there was this proposal that the criteria be opened up to allow for paying salaries
Okay.
with CODA money.
It's a sticky wicket. I mean, once you open that up.
I mean, I can see where, you know, like Steve said, and we saw with Story City, you can't do a musical without a choreographer or music director. So I can see where, yes, that would be a salary that would be paid because you need it for the show, but you can't pay like administrative people or ticket sellers or anything like that, really.
Well, it's more of a stipend than a salary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or consultant or.
Yeah.
When the agencies report back after the grant money is spent, what is the expectation of how they itemize their expenses to us?
They fill out a final budget reporting form that looks a lot like their budget when they request money. They just tell us exactly how they spent it. I don't recall what the specific items are in that line by line. It's on our website.
But so are you? I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit, Brian. What you're saying is that as long as potentially, like maybe a portion of a salary is rolled into a program expense for the agency, as opposed to separated out.
Yeah. So I mean, the way that this works now, it is possible to take. You know, I don't think that this is really solving much is my concern. I think, you know, if it costs an organization $1,000 to put on a show, and a part of that expense is they've got to pay somebody to be a director, and the rest of it goes towards buying, you know, scripts or whatever it might be. Ultimately, our contract with them doesn't say we're paying you X dollars for the salary for the director and X dollars for the scripts. We're saying we're paying you $1,000 and you're going to put on a show and it's going to be open to the public. That's what we're buying. We're buying the show, right? The bigger thing. So if we were to say we are signing a contract with an agency so that agency can pay a staff person $25.98 an hour for wages, that's not a public benefit. We're not getting anything for the public from that direct transaction. So they're eligible to wrap in their expenses into the cost to produce some product for the public. But to just pay the money directly for a salary is generally not how we do things. Does that help explain the example there? Okay.
That's why accountants get the big bucks.
Most of them are working for free for the nonprofits. Well, then I don't know that we need any kind of motion at this point, because our established criteria is that we do not pay salaries for regular full-time or part-time staff. And we already allocate money for conductors, directors, that type of thing for one performance. So unless somebody feels we should be making an exception and wants to battle over that, and I don't think we need a motion, do we, Brian? Because we're not changing anything. Okay. Then we'll move on to upcoming important events. Our next meeting, kids, is June 7th on Zoom at 5 o'clock. Same bat time, same bat channel.
I will let people know I most likely won't be able to make that because I'm going to be on the road, like literally driving at that time. But if I can find a coffee shop on the way, I will call in.
Anything else for the good of the order?
Sue Ann has her hand raised here.
I apologize. I just had a question about the fall grant because of what Deanne had asked in that question about why we would be requesting the honoraria change, but our annual grant is helping us with rent. And so to be able to rent the venues, to be able to put on these shows and to practice. And so the change in honoraria is a change of our annual budget, annual grant budget. Does that make sense? It's like about a $5,000 increase in expenses. So the annual grant wasn't covering Frozen per se. I just thought there was confusion to me about what she was asking, or maybe I misunderstood.
Well, as far as the special grant that you just applied for,
Yes.
right? And it seems one could look at it and think it was an addition to the annual grant that you've received.
Correct. It is an addition because it increased our budget over what we had asked for when we applied for the annual grant, because we asked for the annual grant last October. And the planning for our expenses was $5,000 less than what it's going to end up being. Does that make sense?
Oh,
So the annual grant really is helping us with rent.
right.
It doesn't really have to do with any part of the other part of the project except rent.
And so my question was, the special grant proposals I thought were supposed to be separate projects versus adding on to the annual.
I've asked this question before of CODA for clarification. Maybe even 4 or 5 months ago, I had re-asked when somebody had said something similar. And because my understanding was because it was a switch of even what the show was. It's not even the same exact show. It's a completely different. It was going to be a different play, and then it became a different musical. Am I misunderstanding the special grant criteria?
I defer to Tom.
No, I think you understand fine, Sue Ann. And because you changed the program and your expenses changed, but I feel it falls under the special grant criteria, especially this year.
Okay, thank you. That's what I had asked prior to us asking for it. So thank you for the clarification.
Sorry for the confusion.
No problem. I understand. There's a lot of details.
Anything else, anyone? Then I adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
All righty. Thank you.
Have a good evening.